Hello and welcome to the Youth Work Plus podcast. I'm Becky Lawrence, your host, and I'm joined today by our guest, Tony McGinley. I've known Tony for a while now, over 10 years. We're good friends. Tony used to be a full-time youth worker, and I'll let him explain a little bit more about what he's doing now and his context. How did you get into youth ministry, and unpack all of that in the first...
First hour.
Yeah, the first hour.
Yeah.
The first 5 minutes. Let's stick to 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for having me because I feel a bit of a fraud because, as you say, I used to be a youth worker and actually with family life at the minute, I feel more like a children's worker because I've just dropped off my daughter on the first day of school. She's first day into year 2 today, so I'm not going to be on best form today because I'm a bit of a nervous wreck, a bit of a sad wreck, and I think 2 years on it'd be easier, but it just isn't. But actually, as soon as I'm finished with this, even worse, we're dropping youngest daughter who's 3 off at nursery for the first time. So yeah, a real kind of a day of milestones in our house. But yeah, I've got 2 daughters, Lydia who's 6, Eva who's 3, and then married to Sarah. And we are based in Milton, Keynes. I'm the pastor for Whitehouse Church, which is a church plant on a new build housing estate. I think it was technically one of the biggest new build housing estates. Yep. About 5,000 houses, but there are a few of those around now. But 5 years ago when we started, I think we were the biggest housing estate in the UK. So yeah, lots to unpack, lots to share, I'm sure. But in terms of youth ministry, I was a youth worker prior to being a pastor. In my current context, I was a youth worker for 12 years. And that was through varying different contexts, through mainly local church-based youth ministry. In a Baptist church here in Milton Keynes. Prior to that, did a little bit of traveling, was in Tanzania for 6 months, and that had some youth work, but not explicitly youth work. And then prior to that, I was 4 years working for a fantastic schools-based charity called the Bridge Builder Trust. They're dear to my heart and big part of my story coming to faith, but also the journey through youth ministry as well. So yeah, lots to share, I'm sure, in the next little while.
Yeah. And obviously, as a pastor, kids, youth work, family ministry is a big part of that. Can you unpack how kids, youth and families are a big part of what you do as a church?
Yeah, and I think particularly for our context, we have, like I say, not only a huge new build estate here, but we've got 2 primary schools which have been brand new since the estate opened, soon to be 3 primary schools, and we've got a secondary school here as well. And so very much family orientated community of a gathering of people from all nations. And I'm a governor at my daughter's school, and I believe the head teacher said there are 32 languages spoken in the primary school. Yeah. Which is unbelievable, and that's not even fully subscribed yet. So we've got, I think, 1 class per year group just started today, and so yeah, it's huge, diverse community. And what that looks like in our setting, we planted our church from the Baptist church in which I was the youth worker 5 years ago, and we started with 14 adults and 19 children and young people. So already we had this ready-made children's and youth ministry.
Yeah.
They were just the children of the parents who'd planted alongside me, who'd moved to the area as well and felt very called to plant a church. And then organically, we've grown that over time. So we now have youth ministry of about 30 young people if everyone's there all at the same time, and a children's ministry of about similar number, which is fantastic. And then therefore, because it's a very young, diverse community, a lot of our outreach is geared towards families. And so during pandemic, it was about how do we create events that are community events at social distance. So we were doing lots of family events outside, free events that were ticketed where people could turn up, just their family unit, and go off and do a treasure hunt or a QR code egg hunt or something like that. And then yeah, that's continued through today. So we do a lot of messy church, do that 4 times a year, and Christmas and Easter are big events that are geared around family, and just making sure that family are part of every Sunday, part of every event that we do. So young people and children are catered for on Sundays with their own groups, but also take part in services as well. They're not just there to be shushed or to make up numbers. They're there they are the church. And so, yeah, very much, accepting them and using them as part of that as well, which is great.
Yeah. And Tony, unpack a little bit more about your ministry journey. How did you find yourself doing ministry and youth work and then transitioning into this role as church planter?
Oh, wow. So yeah, I mean it's like 20 years of life. I guess it started. My story fairly unique. In regards to coming to faith. I became a Christian when I was 16, and that was through a fantastic friendship that I had and a family that just adopted me and loved me, who knew and loved Jesus. And so I was invited to what I was led to believe to be a lad's holiday at Butlins, and that lad's holiday turned out to be Spring Harvest, and so I came to faith at age 16 at Spring Harvest, which was incredible. And from that moment, actually, felt the Holy Spirit, and it transformed me in some way to be confident and share my faith. To be able to just go into that setting, particularly in amongst young people and my peers at the time, and share Jesus. And I guess it's that thing, isn't it? Whatever it is, whether it's, I don't know, the latest phone, or it's the latest trainers, or it's the latest film. It's like, I've seen this. This is amazing. You guys need to see this. You need to have this. And for me, that was Jesus. And
Yeah.
and so I became quite quickly evangelist to friends, and to share my faith quite openly and confidently, because for me there wasn't any kind of reservation there. I hadn't had probably years of growing up thinking, oh, I'm a Christian, that makes me different. I was almost like, no, I've just become a Christian, that makes me different. This is really good.
Mm.
So, um, and so for youth ministry, I think that was born out of a desire to share faith, to truly introduce people to this incredible God that I've just discovered, and you need to find out too. But I think it was also, if I'm truly honest, it was the fact that I wasn't quite ready for adult church yet. And so, aged, I think around 16, I remember the youth leader at the time come to me and saying, coming to us as a group who were sort of just going into sixth form, saying, okay, well, it's now time to transition into the main church because you're old enough, and we really want you to get familiar with normal church services before you go off to university or whatever, and you're more likely to stick with faith in that regard,
Mm.
which is probably true for lots of people. But the uniqueness of my story, I'd never read the Bible, and I'd never been into a church service before Spring Harvest. And
Mm.
so I came to faith, gave my life to Jesus, having never read scripture. I just encountered the living God. And so for me, this was a couple of months later, having now started going to church, having now started to read the Bible, realizing I haven't got this foundation, I haven't got this build up of knowledge of scripture, which means I
Mm.
can go and listen to a church service and feel comfortable.
Mm.
And so for me, it made sense to volunteer in the youth work, and do that and learn as I go.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's kind of what happened. That's kind of my first taste of ministry was volunteering for my local church that I'd really just started to join, and lead younger youth through that group week by week, and learn as I go. And to be honest with you, I was saying to someone recently, I've done now 2 degrees which have included theology, and I still feel like I'm learning. I still don't. I have gaps in knowledge when it
Mm.
comes to things, and my daughters now, with just started getting to an age where we can do like family devotionals. So I've just started doing this family devotional with my daughters, and I'm realizing there are gaps still, and they know things through their Sunday school that they've learned because they've done it from day one. That, yeah, for me, I'm still in that place of like, oh yeah, who's that character again? What's that story? I'm having to like
Mm.
kind of really think through it. Whereas
Yeah.
they've just got that grounding and that knowledge already. So from volunteering, I then, when I finished my GCSEs, did a fantastic volunteer program with Bridge Builder, which is our local schools work charity. And prior to coming to faith, from the day I could walk, all I ever wanted to do was become a fireman. Like, that was going to be what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And it was true up until that point, up to the point I came to faith, and up to the point a few months later, I went and did this project called Mouse Team, which was a transitional program for children going up to secondary school. So
Mm.
what they do with an extended summer, they get year 11s to come uh, and minister to year sixes going up to secondary school. So I had 4 weeks doing that,
Mm.
age 16,
Yeah.
as a new believer less than 6 months, going into every primary school pretty much in Milton Keynes and telling people about what secondary school's like, but also telling people about Jesus. And so I finished that 4 weeks, and we had a debrief afterwards with the team leaders there. And I said to them, I feel like my plans have changed, or God has changed my plans. I feel like God's calling me to be a youth worker. And so two of them, they gave me some great advice on how to go down that path. And I also had a youth worker at the church that I'd started going to, and I spoke to him, and he was going through a degree at the time with CYM. It was Centre for Youth Ministry. I think it's now Children, Youth and Mission. Same acronym, but different meaning.
Yeah.
And he basically said, if you really want to do this, then do it professionally. Like, go and do this, get a degree in it, because you're never going to have the resources in terms of, like, there's the funding's just not there for youth work, but if you get a good grounding in it, at least you'll be able to do it forever. And so I was thankful for that. And so I took that advice on. The trouble was I'd already done my GCSEs, and I basically got results having had this conversation with the youth worker, and I had 2 C's, 8 D's, and an E in old-fashioned. Like, they've got the numbers now, which I really haven't got my head around. But I don't know what that would have been. Maybe 3s and 4s probably. And so I didn't have enough grades to get into sixth form, and to get onto the degree that the youth worker was pointing me towards, I needed at least 2 A levels. And so I went and spoke to the head of sixth form, and I pleaded with him, and I think he saw probably my heart and said, okay, you can come do your A levels, but you need to do a 3-year sixth form and resit your English and maths. And so that's exactly what I did. I just knew that's what God wanted for me. No plans of higher education at that point, but then all of a sudden that became part of what I was called to do. Did 3 years sixth form, then that was followed by a year's full-time experience in youth work. And so I went and worked for the Schools Work charity, Bridge Builder again. And then after that year out, effectively working full-time for them, they asked if I would stay on and use them as my placement whilst I was at CYM. So I stayed with them for another 3 years, which was fantastic. So really blessed with student finance, and a blessing for them probably. They had myself and another full-time student as well doing the same course. And so for a small Christian-based schools work charity, which probably really struggles for funding, all of a sudden they had 2 full-time workers who were being taken care of by student finance, which was fantastic. And they gave us, some gifts here and there. But it was just fantastic. And that was amazing. So I worked 4 years as a secondary schools worker. And back then, I think Christians were so much more welcomed into a school setting. And so I think we were in 14 secondary schools. We used to see about 25,000 young people of a secondary school age in a calendar year.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you would see them multiple times. We'd split ourselves off and go into secondary schools and try to do a run of assemblies once every 6 weeks. So I had a list of schools that would be my schools that I would go into, and we'd try and see them at least 3 times a year, once a term, but maybe even more if we could, if they would welcome us in, and maybe see them, 4 or 5 times over that. And then there was other things we could offer. So there were the RE lessons, Christian unions, emotional literacy. It seemed to be at that point in time, I think, shifting government. There used to be these connection workers, youth workers, effectively in schools. That funding got cut around about the time I started at Bridge Builder. So they were so welcoming to us as youth workers going into the school setting, even if we were sharing the message of Jesus and being in that space. And that was great. So we were just really blessed. And it seemed to be that whatever the school asked for, we would always say yes and work out how to do it. And so it was always a case of like, we recognize there's a line in the Ofsted inspection that it's probably still there in some ways. I was just looking as a governor, and there have to be opportunities within a school week for gathered opportunities of worship, effectively. Can't remember the exact wording of it back then. I think it has changed slightly, but yeah, they have to have opportunities of gatherings and for moral and faith to be shared during that time. And so whilst that was in the Ofsted inspection criteria, it always gave us an open door to be in those spaces, which was fantastic.
Yeah,
I spoke for a lot there.
No, that's great. Love it. And Tone, how did God lead you from that then into what you're doing now? How did you end up then working for the church as a youth worker, and how did that transition happen for planting the church? How did God lead along the way?
So I think my thoughts were at the end of that 4 years, I would love to have worked and carried on with the charity, because I just loved the work we were doing, but the funding just wasn't there, not for 2 of us, and I don't think it was probably fair to accept one of us and not both. So we both left, myself and the other student left at the end of that fourth year, and I just decided like I was going to take some time out and just reflect on what was next. I hadn't really thought, to be honest. So I hadn't, because of the way I transitioned from being 16, coming to faith, doing that 3 year sick form, then doing a year out full time's work, and then doing another 3 year degree. I wanted to just travel a bit and do some of the things some of my friends had done, and not knowing where to go. I've got an uncle who's travelled the world. He's a bit of a walker. He's a bit like Forrest Gump. He's walked everywhere. The northest point of England to the southest point of England, across Australia, east to west, and across America, east to west, and in Europe. And he's having travelled all that way. He's for the last 20 years he's been based in Tanzania in Africa. So I messaged him and sort of said, "Would you mind having me for a couple of months?" And so I just decided to yeah, just take the leap and go. Probably with the expectation that I would come back after 3 months and I would probably settle into a job in a church. I think that was my next thing. I wanted to get experience and I wanted my next job to be in a church. And I kind of wanted a bit of a London experience as well. So I think I left to go to Tanzania thinking I'll come home. That'll be probably the end of my time in Milton Keynes, and I will get a youth work job somewhere in a church in London. But after a couple of weeks of being in Tanzania, I was asked to go and work on an overland campsite. So for people who were traveling, Westerners who were traveling through Africa, there's a campsite that was local to where my uncle was living, and they were just looking for someone to come and lead the hospitality. And so that was real great fun. Like the world, I didn't really move, but the world came to me, and I was able to stay in the same place. And that 3 months then extended to 6 months. And so for 6 months, I just stayed in one location in the middle of nowhere in Tanzania, Africa, whilst the whole world came to me, about 60 people on buses from all over the world. And my job was to basically just make sure they were having a good time and enjoying their holiday. And so real kind of change from youth ministry and youth work. But there were lots of local village young people starting out their careers and starting out their work for the first time on that campsite. And so youth work for me then became, my mission effectively became just working with young people from Tanzania as they transition from education into the working world. And that was fantastic. And so I loved that. And then there were a few groups locally, I say locally, a couple of hours away, that were church based, and they used to bring their youth groups to do weekends away at our campsite. So I'd always spend time with them and have fun with them. And then after I extended for the second lot of 3 months, which would have took me to 6 months, I got an email to say that there was a church in Milton Keynes that were looking for a youth worker, and would I be interested? And so I had to be quite honest and say that I'd committed to work in Tanzania for another 2 months after this, and if the job was still available, if God wanted it, then I would go for the job. And so I don't know really what happened, whether they kept that job open, whether it was just God's intention. But it also led me back to Milton Keynes, and I had to think about, was that really where I wanted to be? And it truly was. I don't think that the London idea was next, but for me it was actually, this is God answered prayer. And so I landed on a Friday, had my CV into the church on the Saturday. I met with the pastor on the Monday. There was a kind of moving quite quickly, a little bit of meeting with other people in the church, it's like the trustees and things like that. But because it's a Baptist church, then everything then started to slow down. I can say that as a Baptist minister now. Yeah, we moved quick and said, yes, this is good. We've waited for 2 months to then, we've now got to wait and you'll start in 4 months. But once I did start, it then didn't really stop. I was there then for 6 years as the youth leader, and very quickly met my wife, Sarah. She'd moved up from Brighton and was doing a job as a youth worker in another Baptist church in Milton Keynes. And so I met her at a citywide youth mission. As soon as she walked in, I was just like, who is that person? I guess the benefit of being from Milton Keynes, which means that you kind of know people across churches, but I could tell she was someone new, and so instantly wanted to get to know her. And then a few kind of cheeky invites of like, oh, let's go for work coffees, because you're a youth worker, I'm a youth worker. But actually it was just like, I want to know who you are. And so then that was 2013, and then we got married in 2015. So then Sarah moved across to where I was working, and we continued to just sort of minister together. And that was fantastic. We got to a stage where we were renting the cheapest property available in Milton Keynes to us, which was a one-bedroom bungalow. And after about 18 months of marriage, started to think, well, we do want to start a family, and what does that look like for us? And so I think we've been telling people confidently, but I don't know why, thinking back, confidently, we're going to move into the western expansion of Milton Keynes, this new build estate. And actually, it was all farmland. There was a hedgerow, which is now a main road, and we were just telling people we were going to move there. And I think we felt very confident in it until the first showroom opened. And I remember going around the first showroom, and they showed us around, and I think I was, wanting to find out prices and our possibilities. What would we have to do to get a house here? And the letting agent, the person in the showroom, said, "Oh, go look around the house." And so we go look around the house, and we fell in love with the decor. We fell in love with the furniture. We fell in love with the dream of living here. Then we went downstairs, and they were like, even 8 years ago, okay, the cheapest property we have on the estate is £450,000, and then we realised there is no way we're going to live here. And so we left pretty despondent, and then we turned it to prayer, and felt again just so confident that God wanted us here. And that basically led to us complaining on one occasion, probably 6 months later, to my family about the fact that our rent was going up, and it was annoying because we wanted to buy property and to save, but that was going to dampen our possibility. And my mum's in social care. She works people with learning disability. And so she said, "Have you ever thought about social renting? It's sort of cheaper rent for the same sort of houses that you would want to live in. Rent for a few years, start a family, and try and save." And so she mentioned a housing association's name that she works with through her workplace. And I went on the website, and there was some apartments available here, which is now Whitehouse. And so, but the deadline was the next day. So I was up until 1 a.m. I don't know why I was the person filling this form out, because Sarah definitely is the person. I think she was tired. She falls asleep, and I'm just proactive. So I'm filling out this form to try and get us this apartment in Whitehouse. And then the next day, I was in church speaking up front about some mentoring I was doing at a young offenders prison, a secure training centre here in Milton Keynes. And a guy who I didn't really know too well at the time came up and started speaking to me about where this young person who was about to leave the secure training unit was going to be living, what's he going to be doing, what friendships he going to hold. I was like, "You seem to be asking a lot of questions around this line, like, what is it you do?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just because I work for this housing association." It was the same housing association I'd written to the day before. And so I said, "Look, I don't want to kind of overstep the mark, but can I ask you some personal questions? I'm looking for these apartments. Do you know what the likelihood is that we would get one?" And Scott, his name is, and he, bless him, he helped us. He didn't do, we didn't get it because of who we know, but what he did do for us was tell us that if we wanted to go for the apartments, it was a strong likelihood we would get one. If we wanted to miss out on the apartments, there was a previous set of houses that were available, and there was one coming up for reallocation because whoever was given it didn't want it anymore. And so would we be willing to sacrifice on the apartments to maybe go for the house? And so we prayed about that and felt, okay, that's what we should do, because that would give us a long-term option. Moving to the apartment would move us in for the time being, but maybe not forever. And so Easter week of 2016, called up and found out that God had worked, had answered prayer, and prayer had worked, and we'd been given a house here. And that was the Tuesday of Easter week, and on the Wednesday night we had communion, and a lady who again didn't know very well in the church, quite a sizable Baptist church at the time, she came and said, "I've been having this reoccurring dream for the last 6 months. I thought it was to do with my son's wedding. It's this big white marquee, but my son got married last month and I'm still having the dream. And it's this white marquee. I'm seeing it's become more elaborate, and now I'm seeing the surrounding area, and I'm seeing people from our church moving into it, and I'm seeing our musical instruments moving into it. I shared it with our pastor, and he tells me I need to speak to you." And so I was like, "Okay, so whereabouts is it?" And she said, "Well, it's in the western expansion area, Milton Keynes." And so that was the first inkling I had. I think we always had a desire to serve the community, or to be good neighbours, and to kind of tell our neighbours about about Jesus. But yeah, even before moving in, the week we found out we had the house, which wasn't sort of foundation level at that point, we didn't move in for another 6 months. God was already highlighting to us that there was something more.
Yeah.
And and then within the 6 months of us moving in, we moved in August. Within 6 months of us moving in, another 5 families from our church organically moved to the estate. So it wasn't like we were up the front of church saying, this is what's happening, come join us.
Yeah.
It was amazing to me how many people were making that decision, because they had smaller properties or rental properties in Milton Keynes, and this was them laying roots down in Milton Keynes, but not realising actually they're laying roots down in Whitehouse. And so I'd love to say there was loads of strategy. I'd love to say there was lots of planning, but there was none of that. It was just simple God stuff and obedience from us to say, okay, we'll go where you say go.
Yeah.
And then after that, about 18 months later, the ministers at the church were starting to ask questions then. What is going to happen? We'd started a house group here in Whitehouse. And I believed that we would be a bit of a satellite from the church that we were part of. That I'd be a youth worker of 2 sites, and I was quite excited by that, I think. And because I'd done my degree in youth ministry and that resonating kind of idea that I was going to be a youth worker forever, I think the role changes, and probably for people listening to this, it maybe already has for you, that you start maybe young, and they're almost, young people are almost like your peers, and you can get on their level because you are at their level, and then you continue through your youth ministry, and maybe you get a bit older and your role changes slightly because the relationships change slightly. They look at you differently because you're a little bit older now, and maybe you are that older brother figure or the uncle figure, and then it changes again slightly that you're the dad figure or the older uncle figure. I had visions of being the 70-year-old youth worker who's still relevant but being looked at as a grandfather figure.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was the plan. But we had a week of prayer, I think in 2018, in the church, one of the Thy Kingdom Come weeks of prayer, and our house group from Whitehouse took a 2-hour slot. And what we were asked to do in the run up to that was decide whether we were going to start a plant here, a satellite of the church.
Yeah.
And so what was decided in that 2 hours, was we were going to start a church, but B, I was going to lead that church. That those who were already here were saying, "Now, Tony, we think you're the person. We think you're being called to be a minister." And so that kind of hit me a bit left field, and I was a bit shocked by it. And so a lot of soul searching, a lot of prayer, a lot of working out, like, is that what God's called me to? Hated the stereotype that, you do youth ministry till you're ready to do adult ministry.
Yeah.
Wanted to fight against that as hard as I could. Spoke to the pastors, and senior pastor, when I'd started working there 4 years previous to this now, a few years previous to this, he'd already said, I think you should go through ministerial formation. You should go through these Americans who's like, whatever they call it, seminary school.
Yeah.
And I was like really not part of that at that point. And because I just wanted to do youth work, and I kind of just finished my degree, so it wasn't part of my plans.
Yeah.
I remember speaking to Sarah actually, and Sarah was probably she was the first person to say that maybe I should pastor a church because when we first met, having those conversations, I remember walking through our local area where the church was and having this conversation with her about my future plans as we were getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And I said, "What do you think you'll do?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to be a youth worker forever." And I guess if there is natural progression, I guess it is to become a pastor of some form. But I don't feel like God's ever going to call me to do that. And without missing a beat, Sarah was like, "Oh, good," because I don't see myself being a pastor's wife. And she could say that with all sincerity and all truth, because she was living with the pastor and his wife at that moment in time in the church that she was part of. So she was seeing everything that was coming to their door, every situation and crisis they were having to deal with. And she was at that point in time saying, "No, I'm not sure this is what I'm called to be." But I remember going to the HDB conference in London before actually we had our time of prayer together for that week of prayer at church. And the associate pastor of the church, we were on the train back, and he said, what do you think's happening in Whitehouse? And I said, "Well, I'm not sure." And he said, "What does Sarah think?" And so I came home, and that kind of stuck with me. Came home that night, and I asked Sarah, and she said, "Well, there's going to be a church there, right?" And I said, okay, well, and so what do you think our role is going to be in that? And she was like, well, you're going to lead it, right? And she didn't say pastor it in that sense.
Yeah.
I still translated that as like, oh, you'll be the youth worker across two sites, but
Yeah.
maybe because we live here, you'll be here more. You'll maybe have to preach a bit, but yeah. So all of that came to be. So God shifting Sarah before He shifted me
Mm,
was helpful, and
yeah.
then hearing this group that you've sort of kind of led, I guess, in a house group say, no, we think this is what God's doing, and we think you should lead it.
Mm,
Was helpful. And then in the Baptist world, you have to go, you have to have a call to ministry from your church. So that went through a members meeting, and that was unanimous, and that was emotional.
yeah.
You then have to have a meeting with, so they call it ministerial recognition. You go forward and have 3 interviews with a panel of 4 Baptist ministers or people of part Baptist churches.
Mm,
And so you have an interview with 12 different individuals across a day. So I had that, and that was yes. And I
mm-hmm.
think, to be honest, I was just looking for a no. Every point I was thinking, okay, Sarah's saying this group's saying this, the church is not going to say yes. And they unanimously said yes.
Yeah.
I went for ministerial recognition, and they said yes. And you then have to study at a Baptist college. And the one that I felt drawn to and the one closest to home is Regent's Park College in Oxford, which is a private college of Oxford University. So even though it's a Baptist college, you still have to kind of toe the line in terms of the academics of Oxford. And that's true of the college itself, because they have to uphold standards to remain as part of Oxford University. So I'm thinking they're not going to say yes, but sure enough, they did. And so, I've done that degree part time and just finished this May. Went through ministerial formation. That takes 3 years, and then you carry on for another 2 years part time, and you can actually get a degree, a theology degree from Oxford, which is the same as anyone else who goes to Oxford and gets a theology degree.
Mm,
So it is God's sense of humour, God's love, I think, and blessings that, yeah, the guy who wanted to be a fireman, who got 2 C's, 8 D's, and an E. We've just had young people receive their A level and GCSE results.
yeah.
I guess I'm one of those stories that says, look, you might receive results that you don't like, you might receive things that you don't expect, and maybe the pathway changes. It did for me, but I got the results I thought I needed to become a fireman, but God had other plans.
Mm,
And then I'm going to graduate next March with a degree from Oxford, and it's just the most bizarre, ridiculous thing from where I've come from. No one in the school I went to, not many of us got degrees, so never
yeah.
mind getting one from Oxford, which is a blessing. So
Yeah. Amazing.
that's a lot,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's how I got where I am. So yeah, answered the call to ministry, and then we planted the church. And I stopped my youth work role for the Baptist church that I was working for, Loughton Baptist Church in Milton Keynes. September of 2019, we planted the church. In January of 2020, we met in person in our local primary school, which was the only community space to meet at the time. We
Mm-hmm.
still meet there now. We started meeting there January of 2020. We met for 10 weeks. The church grew in that first couple of weeks to 25 new faces, and then pandemic hit, and we were online for 2 years like everyone else.
Mm,
And yeah,
mm,
loads of God's blessings and God's grace throughout that time. The right time to plant, even though didn't seem at the time like the right time to plant, because we were able to be geographically, purposeful in our building of relationships with people on the estate. So having gone into pandemic with 19 children, young people, 14 adults, growing to 20 adults, we actually came out of pandemic with 40 adults and similar number of young people, 20 young people.
which is
It was a
amazing.
blessing.
It's amazing at a time where lots of churches lost people because they just got out the habit of attending and being part of things.
Yeah. And I think identity, right? So I think for Milton Keynes and probably for most bigger cities, you go to the church, or you went to the church that kind of fit with the flavour you were looking for. Whether it was because it was a particular person leading and you liked their preaching, if it was the music, if it was meeting a need elsewhere, that it was they had great community work going on during the week, great youth work or children's work, you tended to go to the one that was the one you wanted to go to. And and that kind of local church idea kind of died off a little bit. And I think we're probably rediscovering that a bit post pandemic. I think
Mm.
not entirely, but I think it was a for the city churches. I think it was a huge identity um, kind of a crisis, maybe, but a call to who are we when people get in their car and travel 15 minutes to get to us, 20 minutes to get to us every Sunday. We can't easily minister to them in a social distance because they're scattered. And so yeah, in terms of being in person, but then online forms of ministry took off, and that's become something else and something different as well. So so yeah, lots of things there, but there are people way more qualified and way more got way more wisdom around pandemic than I have. So I've not got much to offer on that, but I reflect that God took me out of youth ministry right before pandemic. How would I have dealt with a pandemic as a youth pastor? Yeah, I thankfully didn't have to answer the question because it was just that would have been difficult, I think. But incredible that there were amazing youth workers out there doing incredible things and seeing firsthand some of the incredible things youth workers were doing in that time
Mm.
to minister to those young people.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolute blessings.
Great. Thanks, Tone. Tell us a lesson that you've learned from ministry along the way. There's
uh,
probably been many, but pick
there's a
one.
few. Um, I don't know. I think I've probably touched on it already. I think you're part of your own journey, and you don't always technically see your growth. I can look back as I've told that story now and see that God has grown me over time. But but I think yeah, advice I guess as well as something God's taught me is you always know way more than you think.
Mm.
Um, and so it would surprise me and does still surprise me when I'm the voice in the room that people are looking to speak. And and I think we have to grow into that. We have to recognize it sometimes.
Mm.
Uh, what scares me is people may be doing that long before I even recognized it was happening. What was I saying in those moments when I wasn't really realizing that I'm the voice that carries? So yeah, I would say God has shown me that I know more than I think I know, which is helpful. But I also I guess the flip side of that is I probably don't know as much as I should. So, and that's okay too. And I think there's authenticity and vulnerability in that, of which
Mm.
I think we are aware of, and we try to hide.
Mm.
And I'm dyslexic, and one thing I've never hidden actually is the fact that I am. And so even now, what tends to happen is if I'm doing the reading before I preach, which happens quite often, I will start reading through, and particularly when you get to like the genealogy of Jesus and some of those long lists of names and places, like my mind just goes. It doesn't matter whether I've practiced it. And I remember it started in youth ministry and carries through to today in church services. That I would start reading, and then there'll be a point where I just pause, and it doesn't feel too long, but it probably isn't as long as it feels, but then someone will heckle, someone will take over, someone will say the word, and then I just pick up and I carry on again. And so it's become this really lovely thing, and it was a lovely thing in church services where I was struggling and someone would take over. So I think vulnerability is really good,
Yeah.
and authenticity is really good. So owning what you can't do, whether through disability or otherwise, but what you also don't know, saying and owning up. I'm not sure on this
Mm.
is is helpful, but and then fully reliant on God. I think in the last couple of years, recognizing that there are moves in faith, and I think that's kind of happened particularly in my prayer life in the last couple of years. Like there is nothing that I can do. There's no action I can take that is more important than prayer for kids, for young people, for the people that I'm ministering to.
Mm.
So I think that's what God's doing. Like I can try and do all things. I'm always wanted to be a firefighter, and probably what I have tried to do is put out fires everywhere that God's asked me to minister. And actually, rather than putting them out, sometimes God asks us to bring the fire, to pray, and to ask that He be part of it. I think it's A.W. Tozer's got a quote. It says, "God comes where He's wanted," and and that's as a soundbite is just fantastically encouraging. But the true quote reads, "God comes where he's wanted, but all too often he waits in vain." And I
Mm,
just think, oof, like that is
yeah.
like so much can be done and so much can be can be achieved if we put full faith, full reliance on God to work in the situations that actually we don't really have much power in at all.
Yeah.
Um, and to dedicate that time. So yeah, I think that's probably my answer on that. It's to kind of make ourselves less so that actually we become more in some ways, which yeah is probably quite biblical.
Yeah. Totally. I love it. And I haven't asked you this before we
That's all right.
chatted, but have you come with a question for me or not? Doesn't matter if you haven't.
Uh, I can think of one.
Go on
Let's
then.
have a little think. Yeah, so I guess Youth Work Plus in its infancy still. I guess where would you like to see Youth Work Plus go? Let's say if it's snapshot in 5 years' time, where is Youth Work Plus
Mm,
from where it is currently
yeah.
to where it will be 5 years from now?
Yeah. I think my heart for it really is that we will be able to connect with as many youth and children's leaders here in Milton Keynes and beyond that want and need our support. I think most of that growth so far has happened organically, people finding us or people seeing something about us and finding us or finding out from somebody else.
Mm,
And that's still continuing to happen. Or a paid youth worker leaves and another one comes in their place and we sort of connect with the church in that way. Our network is continuing to grow, which is great. And there are over probably 200 churches in Milton Keynes, and we're probably only connected with about 35, 40 of those. So yeah, continuing to like spread our reach really and support people who need our support. And I'm quite open to what we do in terms of what support and the work that we offer to ebb and flow and change depending on what people need.
mm,
Being connected with people and finding out what those needs are to be able to pivot and change to provide what it is that people need in the best way that can be received. Because I think the challenge is, like Milton Keynes at the minute, that the majority of people that we connect with are volunteers.
yeah.
Like, there aren't a lot of paid youth or children's workers within Milton Keynes. There's probably less than 10 amongst those 200 churches, which
Mm,
is not a lot. And there are 250,000, over 250,000 young people here,
yeah.
um, which isn't a good ratio of paid church people who are reaching those people. So I'd love to see more investment from churches in that, and for us to inspire some of that investment and to be able to connect people with funds or grants that they could get for those kind of things. Um,
Yeah.
More growth, more God leading us where we need to be really, and being open enough to go where we're needed and to make the connections where they're needed really.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like it's a special time, right? So no, I think that's great. And we do pray for Youth Work Plus and we'll continue to pray that's the case and that growth
Yeah.
escalates. But I think it does feel like there's a change in the time. It is an
Yeah.
exciting time, I think, for youth workers and for young people in terms of their faith. Um, I think, yeah, probably in the time I was a youth worker, I think, and I've been really blessed that the context of which I've worked have always been, kind of well resourced in terms of, putting young people as a priority. Obviously, the youth work charity, that was the case, and they gave me a fantastic platform of which to grow my competency as a youth worker. But then in the church context, they resourced it financially. They resourced it in terms of, yeah, it was almost like they just couldn't do enough for the younger generation, which was a blessing. But I think what I was seeing around me, probably in the time I was in that Baptist church role, was that lots of youth workers were sort of disappearing and churches were resourcing elsewhere. That, I don't know whether it was evangelism became more of a focus for people, or
Mm.
social action became more of a focus for people than youth ministry. And I think that was possibly because, and I think, it was reflected in professional youth work as well. I think CYM, where I trained, went from 5 centres down to 1 centre in that time as well. So there
Mm.
were less people becoming youth workers. So I think that reflected because there were less jobs in youth work, less
Yeah.
finance in youth work, paid roles in youth work, and shifts in government changed things too.
Yeah.
And I think there was also a little bit of fear in church life that actually, if we focus too much on creating a space for young people to be that is separate to church, then young people will never integrate into church.
Yep.
And I think there was some fears around that probably 10 years ago. And so it's almost like, okay, well, let's start to defund and let's incorporate young people into church life. And I don't know if that necessarily worked. I don't think it probably did. I think it just nursed a further decline in church attendance, probably, and all of a sudden we saw less young people in church. So I don't think that was great. But now, I mean, latest statistics say that there are more young people in church now than there were 5 years ago. And I do wonder whether that it has something to do with, yes, God at work, but also because we are just more open to and maybe have a different focus again on providing resource for young people and a younger generation. We have to reach and we have to meet them. And I think the more we try to meet young people whilst trying to still incorporate them into the main church life is important, but recognize that there are just things that they're going through and things that they're coping with that are so different to the things like even we did as adults, because times change, things change,
Yeah.
the pressures are similar but different. And as the world continues to open up and AI becomes a thing and life is more online than it is elsewhere, and they're potentially working for jobs that don't even exist yet, working in settings like this online rather than in an office base where they're not going to necessarily have human contact, person to person, face to face, then yeah, the world starts to look very different for them going forward. So I think it is important for young people to and youth ministry to continue to be well resourced and for young people to be looked after, which is good.
Tone, you mentioned before earlier about the fact that kids and youth and families are 100% part of the heartbeat of what you do.
Yeah.
Obviously, some of that passion is because of your background and your history of being involved in youth work. And I think probably you have a slightly different perspective on the value they bring to the church. Some of that passion is innate within you, whereas I think some other ministers who haven't had that youth work background, their vision and perspective is on adult ministry, and some of them catch a bit of a vision for youth and children and families, but not always. How do you think people like you and I can spread some of that inspiration to get children and youth and families more on the radar of those kind of churches and those kind of people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think ultimately I found really helpful in youth ministry. I continue it through to pastoral ministry now. It's like, know the season you're in, like know what you're supposed to be doing now, and have one glance at what's coming next or what you feel like God's got coming next. Because I think and I'm really open and honest, we have a fantastic youth ministry. As a 5-year-old church plant of 30 young people, incredible. That's more young people than some villages see across 5 churches. That's incredible. We also have a YouTuber leading our youth ministry, and that has a massive part to play in why that's big. So it's not all just because what we're doing is fantastic. It's to say, no, actually, I think you've had Dan Cutting on the podcast, right? But so some of it is that. So that helps a lot. It's, again, part of that resourcing. It's part of that saying we're going to invest. What really helps is have someone who's got 2 million subscribers. What we don't do is exploit that. We don't advertise that we've got Dan and his wife Kelly. Kelly's the strength, to be honest. We don't advertise we've got them leading the youth work, partly because the fear of people are only going to come because of that. And what we haven't worked out yet, whether that's ethically okay, that young people are coming to church only because they want to see Dan and meet Dan, but might catch something of Jesus on the way. So we're working through that. So that's, I guess, where we're at. But I also don't necessarily know if I buy into the idea that every single church has to invest in youth ministry. I think they should, if that's what God's calling them to do. But I think there should locally be a church that has that focus, that is known for being that church. If your church has young people, you absolutely should invest. But I think a lot of churches get despondent because they're like, we don't have any young people in our church. Well, know the season you're in. If the season you've got coming, you envision young people being there, we'll invest in youth ministry. Otherwise, we'll focus on what God's called you to focus on, and maybe invest in an organisation like Youth Work Plus, who are doing it elsewhere. I think it's a vision of the body of Christ. Youth Work Plus are doing what you're doing so that the church that has 50 older people but no young people, you're doing the work you do, young people, so they don't have to because that's not their calling. And they're doing the work with the 50 older generation because that's who they're called to be right now in this season. And you're not necessarily having to do that. So you don't have to, you're Youth Work Plus, you're not Old Age Plus. But absolutely, there has to be investment. We can't say and take our hands away from it and say, well, it's not our responsibility at all, because our responsibility, even if we've got no young people in church, is to pray for those that do and resource those that do. But equally, if they've got an older people's ministry, then that needs resourcing too. And so it might be that there are churches resourcing the ministry of the older generation as well. But I would say know the season you're in. And when it comes explicitly then to young people and for youth workers, I think you've got to know where you're at in terms of, like, I remember when I started at Loughton, we had a fantastic group of young people who were 14, just turning 15. There were 13 of them. And our kind of thing was, 13, unlucky for some, but never for us, because we don't believe in superstition. So, we unlucky for some, but never for us. And that group, once we started kind of building the purposeful relationships with them, finding out what they enjoyed, which was music, starting a youth band, starting a youth service, we saw that group grow quite quickly from 13 to 75. And that was incredible. And in one night, seeing 9 young people give their lives to Jesus in this Baptist church that stood there for 200 years in a place that just, it's probably has always invested in young people, but I just happened to come along in a season where they were ready to make that commitment in that way. And that happened quite early on in my ministry there. But then what happened quite quickly after that was a group of adults became despondent with the church, left the church because they felt there was a church they wanted to travel to in London that was going to serve them better. And in doing that, took their young people with them. And that 75 dropped to about 3 young people because the house group that left, who took their young people with them, were all reachers. They were all your evangelists who were bringing the young people in. So once they disappeared, once they started going off to a mega church, then they took friends with them, or friends just stopped coming to church entirely. And then it was about a rebuild again. And looking at the next generation coming through of young people, it was the 10 and 11-year-olds who, again, you've got to start from scratch with.
Yeah.
And so I went from doing a very kind of what felt like revolutionary youth service every Sunday night to then doing like Nerf and nappy wars and having to get really silly again and having to learn how to have fun again and taking a lot of the youth ministry out of the church and going to places like bowling and trampoline parks. And so I think in terms of how do we encourage, know the season you're in. If the season you're in involves young people, then absolutely resource that and do it in ways that are meaningful and purposeful. And if it's not quite in the season you're in, well, put some money aside for a rainy day, because the church has to continue to regenerate and redevelop, and that will happen through young people coming through. But also look at other people that are doing it, and maybe whether your church is being called to resource other contexts where your youth work is happening, even when you've not got young people in your church. For the congregation I've mentioned that have the smaller, dwindling youth group as well, I always used to think about young people. So when we had our 13, and even if it was smaller than that, when we came to 3 young people, I kind of looked at young people as like a human body. What is it to nourish a human body to grow, to become like a fully fledged adult, to walk out into the world and be exactly, everything they need to be? Well, in terms of faith for a young person, I think they need, I think with CYM, they used to have 6 competencies. And the one I used to enjoy most, maybe because of personality, is building purposeful relationships. And so Sticky Faith, which is probably now 15 years old, said that young people need 5 adults separate from their parents who know and love Jesus for them to be able to stick with faith. So that's a care for the family document. And so that kind of really hit home to me. I recognised I was one of the 5, a major player as being one of the 5, who getting to know young people as individuals, getting to know them personally and being purposeful in doing that was important. They needed that one-to-one mentoring. If I couldn't do it, I made sure there was someone in the church or 4 others in the church who invested in our young people in that way. So it didn't matter how big our youth ministry was, whether it was 75 or 3, I was trying to do that as much as possible. Then you've got the context of the church, whether it is your 3 or your 75. Well, there's the local church. This matters. We're part of the future of this, but we're also part of the present of this. And how do we make sure that's the case for our young people? Important if you've got a smaller youth group, I think, to recognise, well, there are other local churches, and other local churches may have better youth ministry, or bigger youth ministries than ours, or maybe similar youth ministries to us. But when we consolidate our resources, when we pull stuff together, and Milton Keynes has always been very good at this, church citywide events, or even local events, whether that be denominational or otherwise, ecumenical, bringing young people together in a geographical space is helpful, because it might be the case that you've got a young person that comes to your church and a young person that goes to a church across the city, and they go to the same school, and they didn't realize that each other were Christians, and they didn't realize they went to the same school. And the amount of times I've seen it where you take your youth group to an event, and a young person will sprint across the room and hug another young person because they recognize each other from school, they're good friends, and they just didn't realize that each of them went to church. And so it gives them that sense of like, okay, I'm not on my own in this. Like, there are other people in my school that are Christians.
Yeah.
And then there was always the national events, which I always think are a bit of a taste of heaven. For me, it was Spring Harvest, where I came to faith. For others, it's, Youthscape Satellites event.
Yeah.
Other ones. Thank you. So you can tell I've been out of youth work for 5 years. I don't know what they are anymore. But Soul Survivor was that. Back in the day, New Day, New Wine, they're important events, because I think it escalates the faith in a young person who for the first time walks into a space of which there are thousands of people who know and love Jesus, who are all the same age as them. And they realize, oh my goodness, like this is a taste of heaven. We walk around for a week safely, and it doesn't matter whether everything else about you is different to someone else there. What you share is a common belief in Jesus, and that always gives you it gives you an opportunity to open up a conversation, build a relationship, and there's something very special about those spaces. So I'm really grateful and glad that there are those spaces opening up again for young people to congregate, and I think it's the same for adults as well as it is for children. I think our small groups are important. Our personal relationships, interrelationships with young people are important. Our love for one another. That's why the Bible bangs on about it. Our love for one another is important. That is of utmost importance. And then the local church is important. And our opportunities to do local mission, what that looks like for adults, I think is difficult, because I think we're time poor. But there are plenty of charities and organisations, and we at Whitehouse Church have Generosity Sunday, of which we give away chunks of money that are surplus, 10% of what we've given. We spend a week praying for who to give it to, spend a week praying of how much to give, and then spend a week choosing. These are different Sundays. The third Sunday is voting on which of those chosen charities get the proportion of the money. And there's always one that gets more than others. And what we then try to do is not just give financially to them, but say, look, for the next 6 months, you're our chosen charity, and how can we pray for you? How can we serve you in some way, volunteer for you in some way? And we haven't fully got that right yet, but my hope for that is that's how we do our local mission. And then a lot of the families in the church have just gone off to the big church festival that's just happened last week, and they've come back buzzing from that. Yeah. They've become evangelists of the big church fest. So they're saying, look, we all need to do this next year. We all need to go, and we'll camp together. We'll set up a little village together, and that'll be special. So I might get a Sunday off next year, because big church fest ain't going to quite work for my 3-year-old, I don't think. But it seems to be really good, and I encourage it, because again, adults need to see 70,000 people and think, oh my goodness, like I'm so insignificant, but so significant at the same time. And that's important.
They had the biggest year ever, I think, this year at Big Church Weekend.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I heard it was saying like 70,000, but unbelievable.
Yeah, amazing. And Tone, lastly, have you got any nuggets of advice or encouragement that you'd give for the youth and kids leaders listening? You've shared a lot already, but
I was actually hoping for some. I wasn't looking to give any, but yeah. I don't know. I've spoke a lot and probably have given quite a bit already. I think I want to probably circle back. Prayer.
Mm.
Prayer as an action is so important. The way we pray is so important, I think. And intercession, our praying on behalf of others is so important. And I was thinking actually, like, as I was thinking through praying through on a walk the other day through coming to do this,
Yeah.
what's the most important thing that actually we do or we can do for our young people?
Yeah.
The sacred assembly was the word that came to mind. Joel 1:14, consecrate a fast, proclaim solemn assembly. Read it in your own time. But what I kind of the vision I kind of had for that as I was praying through and thinking about coming to share with you today was like, what would it look like in our church? And I'm going to try and see if we can do this and encourage you folks to do it. So it's
Mm.
advice without actually knowing the outcomes because I don't know what the outcomes
Yeah.
are. But what does it look like if 3 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now, you call a sacred assembly of your church leaders, your parents of young people, even your young people if they can handle it, and you just specifically meet to pray for your young people. Like we're meeting for no other reason than just simply to pray. And the focus of our prayer this evening, or today, this afternoon, is going to be our young people. I just think we have so much in terms of resource. There is no greater resource than prayer. There's no greater resource than the spirituality that we put in and the kind of spiritual formation that we build around our young people. Um, Again, I don't know whether it's another Tozer quote or it was a guy called Leonard Ravenhill. I've been reading a lot of off the back of like revival. God's put revival on my heart for the last couple of years. Before the latest Bible Society stats that come out, I've just written my dissertation back in May on revival, and
Mm.
it's frustrating for me because I was having to write a whole chapter probably a year ago on the fact that revival is really difficult language
Mm.
because the minute you start talking about it, you seem like a bit of like I don't know, a bit of a lunatic, or it's just you seem overly evangelical.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like revival is just God doing in a moment what normally takes a decade.
Mm.
It's just a fast movement of God, and that's what I think this generation. It's what we need to see in our current times, and what we possibly are seeing. The quiet revival stuff I think is really encouraging.
Mm.
But in terms of is it true revival yet? I don't know. I'm hesitant just because I don't know if God's ever quiet. Like in that regard, I think ultimately when true revival comes, at least my knowledge of it, as I've been reading about it loads, as I've been reading around it, true revival comes and it changes culture, and that's where I'm hesitant to say quiet revival is the revival we've been praying for yet. I think it might be the foundations for it. It's
Mm.
definitely what everyone's speaking about revival. I had on to the end of my dissertation to say, in the time it's taken me to write this, revival is now not difficult language. It's language that we're all using now. Well, just maybe contextually it's different. I don't know, but I think true revival sees changing culture. What we want to see is a change in culture. I think particularly for our young people, who right now have lack of hope and a lack of knowledge of what future looks like for them. Fear of war, fear of what they're going to be doing with the rest of their life because the job that they might go on to do doesn't quite exist yet. AI taking over, whatever that may be. I think culture's changing, and but actually, like God never changes, and God's the instigator of change, and it might be a season of which we are being called back to do what we've always done, which is pray,
Mm.
meditate on God's word, spend time together, love one another to do that. And so I think it's Leonard Ravenhill, and I think A.W. Tozer speaks of it as well. Their quote is, and I have heard it in a more recent context: "We take over the radio waves." Evangelists and ministers started to put things out on the radio and start to make like secular music, part of our everyday. I think in our modern context, we've filled stadiums with God's people. We've put songs to number one. We've done all we can to be seeker sensitive and try to make church as secular as possible. And all we've done in that is nurse it into the greatest decline in a generation. And actually, when we turn back to prayer, when we turn back to the Bible, when we turn back to just meeting for the sake of those things, rather than we'll do this event, by the way, we're Christians, or we'll do this event and we'll just lob prayer on the end of that. I think being explicit about who we're called to be in that is believers, to be disciples, to go and make other disciples, of all nations, baptizing them. It's the things that matter.
Yeah.
And so I think, advice, if you could do anything for young people today, pray for them. If you really want to challenge, call a sacred assembly. Call your people to go this week, next week, the week after, whenever, set a date in the diary and get every single person there. Because for me, I was excited. I'm literally on this walk and I'm thinking about this and having an opportunity to share it. So thank you for the opportunity. But thinking, what does that look like? In our context, that's up to 60 adults in a space, maybe even more, who are praying for young people. Yeah. And we do a prayer room every Wednesday night here at Whitehouse. We've never had 60 people in that space. But I think if we were to give it a focus for that night, if we were to say like young people who we're praying for, we would get the parents at least, and that's enough. And it's enough, it's enough when it is 4 of us. It's enough when it. There's another quote: "Don't forsake your small prayer gatherings, because in every great movement of God are a small band of believers who are praying out in intercession for revival." I think it's so true. And so, pray for young people. Keep praying for them. Know that there's, way more than you think. There's loads that you're pretending to know that you really don't need to pretend about, and just be authentic and real about. And just know that the things that you do that are most important are the things that no one sees and no one will know. It's the little things, and there were little things as well, I think, that you can do that only take 5 minutes that people think takes an hour or 2 hours, or takes half a day. Enjoy those things, because youth workers particularly work hard. Some people probably don't appreciate how hard work it is, and the things that they think take the shortest amount of time actually take the longest amount of time, and the things that take a short amount of time and they really do appreciate don't actually take that much time sometimes at all. And so appreciate those things and enjoy them, but go the extra step to do those things that add just a little bit more value, that don't take much time at all, because young people appreciate those as well. If it's to make something look good, if it's to spend a bit more time speaking to a particularly young person, those things take a minute, but they sit with a young person forever. So continue to do those things.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the wisdom you've shared, and your story, I'm sure, has inspired people. Yeah, thanks for coming on today.
No worries. Thank you. I'm just about to go off and cry probably a whole heap, because I'm just about to take my daughter to nursery.
Yeah.
So thank you for the distraction this morning. It's been the needed distraction this morning. Yeah. But now thank you for all you do and all the youth workers do that will listen to this and we'll grab hold of it at whatever point in the future. Because the great thing about these forms of media is they just sit there and people grab hold of them whenever. So thank you for all you do, because it's needed. And I'm gutted in some way I'm not still part of it and part of you guys, because it's so much part of my passion and my love for God's people is the generation for tomorrow and for today.
Yeah. Well, you are just in a different way is how I see it, because children, young people and families are still very much part of your role, just in a different way. Thank you for all of our listeners for tuning in today. I'm sure that you have picked up on some nuggets of wisdom from Tony. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, get in touch. Obviously, pray for Tony's ministry, and he'll be praying for yours, whoever you are, wherever you are. And we're cheering you on with everything that you're doing for children and young people. If we can help support you in any other way, then do get in touch with Youth Work Plus. We'd love to connect in with you. Other than that, be encouraged, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye. Thanks, Tony. Have a great day.
Yeah, Andrew. See you later. Bye.